It's Rusty.
Okay, Rusty Nelson. Rusty
right.
Nelson was the photographer, and he'll go into much more detail than this.
Yep.
For the group from 1987 to 88 for about a year. And Larry King, this is Rusty's story now, sold him for sex to some fellow in Washington, D.C. in a motel room. And Rusty wasn't in that. He's strictly a photographer. And so the man came to his room, and Rusty said, let me go in the bathroom and wash up, and he went out the window.
Wow.
And went to Nebraska and lived on one of his dad's farms. His dad's a very wealthy farmer, has a number of farms there. He lived there for about a year, or maybe a little more. And then during that period, the FBI was looking for him. They didn't know where to find him. And his mother, not knowing the circumstances, they came to the mother and asked her where her son was, and she told him. And so the FBI went over to the old farm. It was his grandparents' old farm, and talked to him. And then Rusty took off. And he made his way cross-country in, I think, a hearse. He did have a hearse at one time. I think it was in a hearse. And he was able to handle it financially by going from town to town and offering to wash windows. He's a great window washer, by the way. He's washed my car window many times.
Okay.
And so Rusty then, I'm giving you folks a little background before Rusty comes on the air.
Yeah.
I don't know if Rusty's listening or not, is he?
I don't know, but I hope he is. But I can't. I don't know if he is even capable with, because he had so many of his things stolen by the government.
Well, yes, that's right. And so I'm giving you just the highlights now. And so Rusty is traveling cross country, and he has these pictures of these prominent Washington, D.C. celebrities and others, politicians, et cetera,
right.
who were involved in these activities with these children, sexual activities, and the parties at Larry King's the second party after the first party. And he also is a professional photographer, and so if he would see a beautiful young lady or a person, he would offer them the opportunity to be a model, take their pictures, and so on and so forth. He gets to Portland, Oregon. Now, in the meantime, he's stashed some of these pictures around the country. And he gets to Portland, Oregon, and the police stop him because they say he had the taillight out. They probably knocked the taillight out themselves. And they arrest him, and they confiscate several 100,000 photographs in the back of his hearse. And they tell Rusty that one of the photographs back there, of course, nobody's going to look at a couple 100,000 photographs. One of the photographs in the back of the truck is of an underage girl. Now, I've been with Rusty when he's approached these girls to see if they wanted to be models, by the way. And he always says, now, if you're underage, I don't want you, and I want you to sign this waiver. And they always sign the waiver if they're not underage. Anyway, the Portland police claimed he took a picture of one of these young girls who was underage. They arrested him. They tried him without him facing his accuser. He didn't know who this supposed witness was. He frankly does not believe there was a witness. And he is sent to jail. And while he's in jail, this is Rusty's story to me, because I spent 2.5 months with him here a couple of years ago, traveling all over the West Coast looking for the pictures, by the way. And we'll get into that, I'm sure. And while he is in jail, he told me that men in suits would come in and interview him on a regular basis. Now, you have to understand there's a good possibility Rusty's another one of these mind control victims. And so then I heard that he was out, and he was hiding on a farm in Portland. He was still on probation, but when he got off probation, I called him and I said, Rusty, let's go find some of those pictures. Jumped in a car in Las Vegas, drove to Oregon, about 900 miles, and took Rusty off the farm, and we started looking for the pictures. The first place we stopped was in Oregon, and the pictures weren't there. They were in an abandoned shed The next place we stopped was we drove on into Colorado, and he had hidden these pictures in a mine, abandoned mine.
Jeez.
And we arrived at the mine. It was way up in the Rockies, like 13,000 feet. And the mine had a big steel door on it. We couldn't get in there. And then another place was under a waterfall. And so I went out and bought a harness and rope and everything. We were there it was getting dark, and when Rusty hid these pictures in the first instance, he told me, he was like 160 pounds. Now he weighs about 225. So I'm photographing this from afar, and Rusty goes down on the harness and the rope is tied to the back of my pickup truck.
Yeah.
And he slips, and he can't get back up. And it was dark, and I said, Rusty, look, I don't want to be responsible for you having a serious accident. Come up, and we'll go back there one of these days, someday in the future, okay? That was the other one, the third place. And the fourth place we went, he said it was way up, about 2 miles up in the mountains. We parked along the side of the road. This is outside of Durango, Colorado.
Sure, yeah. And
this is kind of interesting because there was a pickup truck there ahead of us, pulled off to the side of the road. It had Washington plates on it, but I noticed in the back window it had for sale in the Colorado telephone number, 303 telephone number. I didn't think much of it because they were there ahead of us, by the way.
Yeah.
So Rusty and another young fellow went up into the mountains. I started up and I couldn't make it. The atmosphere and the lack of oxygen and all that.
You betcha.
I came back and sat in the car with the reporter, and Shannon. There were 4 of us, by the way. He'd driven up from Mississippi to join us to look for these pictures. And then while they were up in the mountains, and Pat and I waited down below for probably several hours, and the first young man came down, and he said that the individual up there, apparently in the pickup truck, who came down ahead of him, he saw him talking to Rusty, and when he came down and took off, Rusty and the other young fellow were still up there. And then Rusty came down after the other young fellow who went up with him, and he came down and he was saying, lions and tigers and bears.
What? Lions
and tigers and bears. And he didn't know who I was, didn't know who anybody was. He was, somebody triggered him. That fellow, whoever he was, triggered him.
Wow.
And he knew, this individual obviously knew the location and knew where Rusty was going and knew what he was heading for. And they beat him there. They beat him to that location. Now, we didn't find any there, okay? Rusty came down, he said they'd been washed away. It looked like they'd been washed away. So then we went to drove down to Taos, New Mexico, and he'd hidden the pictures in an old abandoned car. And I think that might have been the hearse that he hid the pictures in. And we couldn't find that hearse. We hit some junkyards, and we hit a house where he'd stayed, and they didn't know anything about it. And so, but also before we went to Taos, John DeCamp drove over there with Rusty, and the sheriff met him at that location. I don't know if this is the same location we were looking for them. We can ask Rusty that. And the sheriff met him and told him to get off the property.
Wow. So
the sheriff knew they were there ahead of time. There were every indications that they knew where we were as we went along. You know, they have this GSP where they can track you. And my car is a homing device, and I'm sure it's being tracked every place I go. Because on a regular basis, in fact, I stopped and had lunch today. And while I was having lunch, somebody put my direction signal on, so they know where my car is at all times. And I really don't pay much attention to it.
Right.
It's so common. But anyway, going back to Taos, New Mexico, we didn't find him there. So then I drove Rusty back to Nebraska from there, and we went to the old farm. And you would be shocked to see the old farm where Rusty was interviewed by the FBI.
What?
It was totally destroyed. There were bullet holes.
What?
Yes, bullet holes through the wall, through the ceiling. The heater was turned over. place was torn apart. There were bullet holes through the refrigerator with a high-powered weapon because it went through the front door and through the back of the refrigerator. It went out the house. These were not 38 slugs.
Yeah.
And I said to Rusty, Rusty, who knew you were here? He said, the only people who knew I was here was the FBI.
My gosh.
So now, recently, now that's not the end of the story. So we took pictures of the old house and everything, and then Rusty, and then I had to go out. I'd been there for 2.5 months, by the way.
Yeah.
And by the way, in Colorado, at 14,000 feet in November, it's cold. And I slept in the cab of the truck, and Rusty slept. We had some sleeping bags and everything. He slept. We threw a tent kind of over the back of the truck. He slept in the back of the truck. Then I had to come back. I was gone for 2.5 months. I'd spent all my money. I think I spent about $10,000 on that trip.
Oh my gosh!
And we didn't find any pictures. I said to Rusty, Rusty, why didn't we find the pictures? And he said, well, the only thing I can think of, he said, is that when these men came in and interviewed me in jail in Portland, one of my personalities may have told them where these pictures were located.
Wow.
And so that's basically, and then here recently now, he, in Nebraska, at about the same time that Jeff Gannon's story came forward and that situation was exposed, Rusty, well, first of all, Hunter Thompson was suicided, and Rusty was arrested for failure to register as a sex offender.
Oh, jeez.
And Rusty, so then here about a month ago, about 6 weeks ago, I jumped on a plane and flew back to Nebraska, got him out of jail. His parents are so disgusted with him. They don't understand the situation. Rusty was a nice young man off the farm. He went to Omaha. He was a photographer in one of the nightclubs there. He was approached and solicited to be a photographer for this group, and then he got into it up to his eyeballs, flying all over the world in private jets, staying in the nicest hotels, et cetera, et cetera. You know, he saw the bright lights for the first time in his life. Yeah. And so anyway, so here about a month or so ago, I heard that he was in jail in Lincoln, so I flew back and posted bail for him. It was only $10,000, so I had to come up with $1,000. And then Rusty and I spent about, I guess, almost 2 weeks there. And we talked, we went back to the farm, took some more pictures, and also I did about a 2.5-hour interview with Rusty, and it's on camera. On camera, and I told Rusty I wouldn't release that without his permission, by the way. So
sure.
That's where we are at this time. And Rusty he's a nice young man. He's destitute. We need to help him. I talked to him this morning. He said he had, I think, $6 in his pocket, and that's all. So I'm sending him in fact, I've already got it in an envelope. I'm mailing it to him today. And that's our guest, I guess, in about 10 minutes, right?
Yeah. Ted, this is amazing, because when you realize we're talking about stuff that our government has done to this man. I mean, destroyed him, threatened him, took his livelihood away, and yet they're famous for that because they do it. If you step on their toes, they will get you. Well, they sure got him. Yeah. They've destroyed his life. Now, he was arrested in Norfolk, and then he went down. I brought him down to Lincoln, which is, I forget how many miles that is, maybe 100 miles. And he had to when I got him out of bail, he immediately registered, and because he didn't consider himself a sex offender, because the charges are taking a picture of a minor, right? So he has not been accused of any real sexual offense. Well, were these sexual pictures or what? No, they were not. They were pictures of girls who were models, according to him. They may have been nudes, but they were not sexual. Okay. And so anyway, so I went back and talked to Rusty and got him situated, and he's living with a woman now who's it's not a sexual thing. She's a friend. I met her,
And then Rusty and I and this lady, we would go to the different places where they feed the homeless, and that was kind of interesting because I'd never been to anything like those. Meals aren't too bad, by the way.
Maybe I should try them.
Yeah, I know where to go if I run out of money. At least in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Okay.
But Lincoln's it's a wonderful little town. As a matter of fact, it's my hometown.
Oh.
It's a town of